Paulie Malignaggi has been quite vocal about the fact that he suspects Shawn Porter may be on performance-enhancing drugs. And there have been several exchanges between Malignaggi and Shawn Porter's dad about this particular issue. Now, Malignaggi's suspicions stem from the fact that Shawn Porter hasn't had a lot of knockout victories of late up until he stepped in the ring with Malignaggi. And in fact, if you look at Shawn Porter's record, he's only had 3 knockout or stoppage victories in his last 10 fights. That is not the record of a devastating knockout puncher. And a lot of these guys he's been going the distance with have been fairly low-level opposition. It's only when he fought Devin Alexander, Malignaggi, that he started really stepping up the competition. Okay? But yet he hasn't been stopping a lot of these guys. Even a guy here, Julio Diaz, who Porter says is the toughest guy he's faced as a professional, he went the distance with Julio Diaz twice. Diaz has been knocked out before, folks. Several times in his career. And this was only last year, the rematch with Julio Diaz. That was September 2013. And Julio Diaz then went on to fight Keith Thurman earlier this year and was stopped in 3 rounds. So Thurman managed to stop the exact same Julio Diaz who Shawn Porter faced in 3 rounds, whereas Shawn Porter went the distance with him twice. So Shawn Porter certainly is not a knockout artist. Only 3 knockouts in your past 10 fights against fairly low-level opposition until very recently. That's not a knockout artist. But then he steps in the ring with Paulie Malignaggi, a guy who's normally very durable. Yes, Malignaggi's been stopped by Ricky Hatton and Khan, but he is normally durable. And Shawn Porter blows Malignaggi out of the water, stops him in 4 rounds. So Malignaggi believes that this is an indication that something has changed there. All of a sudden, he's got this explosive punching power seemingly out of nowhere. Now, I agree with Malignaggi that changes in performance, drastic change in performance, can be an indication that there's something not quite right there. Okay, it can be an indication. I mean, it doesn't mean that the guy is definitely on PEDs, but if a guy was to take PEDs, you would expect to see some type of overnight dramatic change in his performance level, because in training he's able to push himself a lot harder, get himself to a point in terms of his fitness and explosiveness and what have you, and gain all the advantages from the PED, which would then manifest themselves in a fight. So that's what you'd expect to see. Everyone's suspicious these days because PEDs are rampant in sport in general, and boxing is no different. You got guys like Mike Tyson and Tony Thompson in recent years coming out and saying that all the top guys, this is what Mike Tyson said. He said all the top guys in boxing today are on performance-enhancing drugs. And I tend to suspect that he's not too far off the truth with that. Tony Thompson also said something very similar. Okay, so everyone's suspicious. But what I see a lot of people doing online is when they see a guy with a ripped, muscular physique, they say, oh, he must be on PEDs. That's completely ridiculous. There are plenty of guys who naturally have ripped, muscular physiques. There's no PEDs involved. You go back to the 50s and the 40s and 30s, there were guys who were big, strong, powerful individuals, big, muscular, ripped physiques. Go back and look at Jersey Joe Walcott. Go back and look at, a lot of the old-time fighters. Cleveland Williams, Ken Norton. You'll see big, strong, powerful guys with ripped physiques. And there was no PEDs back then. There was no steroids and nothing back then being used in sport. But yet these guys had massive muscular physiques. Okay, so you can have a muscular physique naturally. It's not an indication that you're on performance-enhancing drugs. What might be an indication of performance-enhancing drugs is if you're at an advanced stage of your career, you're in your mid to late 30s or early 40s, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, you develop a muscular ripped physique when previously you hadn't had that kind of muscle definition. That might be an indication that something is going on, that there's something suspicious going on. Again, it's not a smoking gun. It doesn't mean definitely that you're taking something. But it could be an indication. If you've had a 15-year career and you haven't been ripped and muscular, and then all of a sudden, overnight, your punching power is increased and you've got this chiseled physique and you're looking like a linebacker, hey, people are going to ask questions, because at the end of the day, a performance enhancing drug could produce those type of results. Okay? So dramatic changes in performance, I think, are what you should look for when it comes to performance enhancing drugs, rather than just a guy's physique. If a guy's had an amazing physique all his career, then you can't really question that as much. Okay? Doesn't mean he's not taking performance enhancing drugs, but it's not really as suspicious, because some people just have a naturally muscular physique anyway. But when you see guys going late into their 30s and 40s, and they're just as fast as they were in their 20s, and their physiques are just as good as they were in their 20s, then it starts getting a little bit suspicious. But when it comes to Shawn Porter, Malignaggi is saying that there's been a big change in his performance, and that's why he was able to take Malignaggi out. And Kell Brook as well apparently is quite suspicious about the Malignaggi fight, and him and his trainer have been lobbying to get this random drug testing, and they're unhappy that the drug testing occurred so close to the fight. They were hoping that it would start a few months before the fight, because a lot of guys who use these performance enhancing drugs, they use the kind of drugs that can be flushed out of the system quite quickly. So they can do all the main work and get the benefits of the drugs and then flush it out of their system, and then a week or two before the fight, they're clean, even though they've been training on performance enhancing drugs previous to that. Okay, so Kell Brook and his trainer were quite upset that it's only in the past week or so that the testing is starting, the random drug testing. And I can understand why they're upset about that. But in terms of the Malignaggi performance alone, Paulie Malignaggi is a guy who has taken a lot of punches in his boxing career. The guy's always had relatively poor defense. He took a horrible beating against Miguel Cotto. He took a beating against Ricky Hatton. He took a beating against Amir Khan. He was stopped by Hatton and Khan. He even took a beating against, I can't remember the guy's name. He was a Mexican guy that Malignaggi fought at Madison Square Garden and got pretty much a gift decision. I can't remember the guy's name now. It begins with a C, I believe. He also fought Ashley Theophane and beat Theophane. Can't remember the guy's name at the moment. I'm sure you'll drop his name in the comment section below. But anyway, Malignaggi is a guy who's taken a lot of punishment in his career. And over the years, eventually, that punishment, especially when you're moving up in weight, is going to catch up with you, and it's going to wear down your punch resistance. That's just a fact. Eventually, your punch resistance is going to get worn down by taking all these beatings from people. So I wouldn't necessarily view the way that Shawn Porter walked through Paulie Malignaggi as necessarily an indication that something has changed in Shawn Porter. I would more likely go with a scenario that Malignaggi's punch resistance has been worn down. He's fighting a guy in Shawn Porter who was just much bigger than him, who was able to just walk forward and let his hands go on Paulie Malignaggi, who's a naturally smaller guy, who's a guy who can't keep anyone off because he can't punch himself. And if you look at guys from the past, Sugar Ray Leonard, Sonny Liston, Muhammad Ali, all these guys were stopped towards the end of their careers. Muhammad Ali had never been stopped until he got in there with Larry Holmes. Then he got in there with Trevor Berbick and he was stopped in 1 or 2 rounds against Trevor Berbick. Sugar Ray Leonard had never been stopped. He'd been in there with murderous punchers like Tommy Hearns and Marvin Hagler and Roberto Duran. Never been stopped. But then towards the end of his career, or actually the last fight of his career, he got in there with a guy in Hector Camacho who wasn't a devastating knockout puncher, but he became the first guy to stop Sugar Ray Leonard. Same goes with Sonny Liston. He was stopped, knocked out very late in his career. Eventually, punch resistance gets worn down. Ray Mercer's another guy. No one could stop Ray Mercer. But eventually, he started getting knocked out. He was knocked out by Shannon Briggs. He was knocked out by Vladimir Klitschko. Whereas previously, he was the Iron Man. And especially the Shannon Briggs fight, he was knocked out with fairly... In fact, even the Klitschko fight, he was knocked out with fairly innocuous-looking punches, at least for Ray Mercer's standards. Okay? punch resistance does get worn down, and formerly very tough fighters can end up getting stopped, and it can look flattering on the guy who stops them. Trevor Berbick was never a devastating knockout puncher, but he managed to stop Muhammad Ali. Like I say, Hector Camacho managed to stop Sugar Ray Leonard. Several guys managed to stop Sonny Liston. A couple guys managed to stop Ray Mercer. The list goes on. Okay, you get the point I'm making. So I would suspect that it's more a case of Paulie Malignaggi's punch resistance not being what it was, and the fact that Shawn Porter was such a naturally big guy, he was just able to manhandle Malignaggi. I don't necessarily think that Shawn Porter did anything too different in the Malignaggi fight to what he'd previously done in his other fights. Shawn Porter is not a knockout artist. He's, we're going to see how his career develops. Maybe he'll turn into one, but I doubt it. Keith Thurman, if you look at Keith Thurman's record compared to Shawn Porter's record, Keith Thurman has got, I believe, 9 knockouts in his past 10 fights. And as I said, he's fought Julio Diaz as well, a guy who went the distance with Shawn Porter twice. Only last year he fought Shawn Porter and went the distance. Whereas Keith Thurman was able to drop him and stop him in just 3 rounds. Okay? Keith Thurman is a knockout artist. Shawn Porter's not a knockout artist. Even Kell Brook has had a lot more knockouts than Shawn Porter has, especially in recent fights. So, yes, Shawn Porter is not a devastating knockout puncher, but I don't necessarily think that his knockout win over Malignaggi is suspicious, to be honest with you. That's just my take on the whole situation. Or any of these guys could be on PEDs, but you have to see something. You have to see a dramatic change in a guy almost overnight to then be, to then have something to go on in terms of being suspicious. You can't just see a guy with a ripped physique or, him knocking out a guy who has previously been knocked out and was coming towards the end of his career and was really just fighting for money. To me, that's not that suspicious. That's just my 2 cents. Drop your comments below. Let me know how you feel. This is Hatman. I'm out.